very much. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Conflict Zone debate, coming to you from Berlin and live on Facebook. Not since the Cold War has German foreign policy faced such serious tests in such a volatile period. North Korea, the new Trump administration, icy relations with Russia and Turkey, the failure to cope with refugees and migrants who continue to flee their home countries, many hundreds of them dying in the attempt to reach Europe. What kinds of solutions do Germany's politicians have to offer to these crises? What role should the country play in the international arena? Should the next German government be doing more or less, or pursuing different goals? Well, 6 representatives of the main political parties are with us tonight in the studio, and our audience will be asking them some searching questions. They are Michael Link from the Liberal FDP party. He's a former junior minister in the German Foreign Ministry and was 8 years in Parliament. Christine Andersen from the Populist AfD Alternative for Germany party. She's campaigning for the Bundestag from the local council in Limburg, where she heads the AfD faction. Stefan Liebich is a member of the Left Party in the Bundestag and sits on its Foreign Affairs Committee. Andreas Nick from the governing Christian Democrats, the CDU, also a member of the Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee, as is Omid Nouripour, foreign policy spokesman for the Green Party, and Ralf Stegner from the Social Democrat SPD, the junior partner in the current coalition. He leads the party in Schleswig-Holstein. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. So I'm going to take our first question from the audience. It's on North Korea, and it comes from Alexandra Welz-Rombach. Please go ahead.
Hello. Germany has called for dialogue and diplomacy over the crisis in North Korea. If you would stand in front of Kim Jong-un today, what exactly would you say to him?
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is kick off with a couple of quick sentences from each of you. What would you say to Kim Jong-un today and why? Let's start with, if you would like, Michael Link, can you start us? And we'll go down the line.
Okay. Thanks for the question. Well, that's a question which really unites us all, because we are all without a magic key for this problem. Because he thinks he's extremely strong, and he hopes, of course, that he can intimidate all of us. But it's extremely important to tell him very clearly, you have lost all friends. I would tell him, you have lost all friends, and we will make sure, by sanctions and by other means, that you will not get any more resources for your weapons. So think twice before you act and before you continue on your aggressive path.
Christine Andersen.
Yeah, I agree. I would certainly tell him he needs to cut it out, and he needs to cut it out immediately. The problem we're talking about here is nuclear weapons. And it is unacceptable that somebody like that has the power over weapons like that. So, in the name of peace of the world, we need to make sure that he will not act on that.
Stefan Liebich.
I think when he is provocative, then we should stay calm, and we should offer him back to the 6 party talks with China, Japan, with South Korea, with the United States, of course. And I think he should end his nuclear ambitions, and on the other side, South Korea and the United States should freeze their maneuvers.
Andreas Nick.
I think there's a short-term priority and a longer-term priority. The short-term priority is to avoid escalation of nuclear warfare or by military confrontation by accident. And I think that should be made clear that this is in the mutual interest of everyone involved. And the second priority for the medium term should be to find a framework under which we could clarify what his real interests are. Is this aggression, or is it mainly using nuclear weapons as a life insurance for his regime? And try to find a diplomatic framework, whether it's 6 party talks with P5+1. We have made clear we were willing to participate in something like that, like we did in Iran. And I think that is one important step to reduce the risk of escalation.
So what do you say in your actual words? He's standing before you. What do you say to him?
Don't be aggressive. Make sure that you avoid military escalation by accident. And let's find a framework under which we can peacefully discuss how to resolve differences in the region.
Omid Nouripour.
I would ask him what he wants. I have no idea. The question is, what do you want? And of course, the question is, what's the price for coming back to the table of the negotiations? And of course, he has to understand, the question is, you have to understand that the world community is sticking together, and we made to have an alliance with China, with Japan and South Korea on that, and he can see that on the question of the coal shipments, for example, being banned, and this is bad for him. So the question is, what's the price for negotiations, and what's the price for getting rid of his nuclear arsenal?
So you want to do a deal? You sit down. The deal is going to have a price.
I would first.
And you want to find out exactly what that price is.
You know, the problem with North Korea is we do not have any influence and we do not have any insights. So we have to talk.
Ralf Stegner.
Well, part of the question is already the answer, talking rather than radical tweets or something like that, and asking him what he wants is right as well. And I would tell him that the world is united in not tolerating a nuclear arms race. And there's nothing to win for him, but maybe more to lose. He has to support his population and has to have a well-being for his people there. Whether we have influence or not is a very difficult question. I don't know whether talks will answer that question, but talking is better than anything else.
Andreas Nick, if I could come back to you, why do you think he should listen to somebody from Germany? What's Germany got to offer?
Well, indeed, we have limited influence on North Korea, as has almost anybody else, with the exception of China. There is a question whether he might be interested over time in relations that may help to improve the livelihood of his people, which is in a desperate situation. We are very.
You're saying you might dangle the idea of economic support in front of it?
Whether I would call it support or at least improvement of the livelihood of its people. We are an important trading partner to many of his neighbors in the region. We have a vested interest in stability, and that should make us a credible party to talk to.
Stefan Liebich, he's learned a lesson, hasn't he, which a lot of people learn in politics, which if you have a big gun and you start firing it, people are going to listen to you, aren't they?
I think we as Germans have one thing to offer. This is the experience of the reunification. We can discuss with him that we managed it, and I think there are people even in North Korea who are interested in our experiences. And
you're not suggesting he wants to unify with the South?
There are people on both sides who are discussing reunification. We have a new president in South Korea now, and he is interested in a different way than the president before.
One kills his opponents and the other one fights elections with them. There's some difference there, isn't
Kim Jong-un would say, and I think we have to try to learn how he sees the world. He would say, yeah, but there are maneuvers between the United States and South Korea. So what I would suggest is we should make freezing in these maneuvers. He has to say he will stop his nuclear ambitions, and then we can go back to talk. And I think this is the best, and it is a possible way.
Christine Anderson, can you said tell him to cut it out.
Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah, assuming that he doesn't, can you afford to leave him to play with his toys and simply walk away?
No, of course not.
So but America has a right to prevent him America has a right to prevent him from using those toys?
Has America a right to do that? They don't have a right to do that unless they have a go from the UN. I would say they can. I'm sorry.
And if Russia and China are blocking that in the Security Council, does America have a right?
Then we need to get them all on the table and we need to talk about that.
That's not going so well these days, is it?
Well, we should at least try it. But I just had another idea. Maybe the word reunification I just heard here. Maybe he is trying to prevent just that. Maybe the world has just become too peaceful for him. I don't know how he ticks, but we need to stop him, and we can't just let him go on doing.
Michael Link has a slightly larger question here. Do you think Germany should play a bigger role in a dangerous world, bigger role than it has done up till now?
I think so. I think so because we have a role to play in defending the multilateral liberal international order. And that means for North Korea, yes, certainly we should play a role, but not as Germany alone, but as part of the EU. Look at what the EU could do, and Germany together with the EU as a strong EU member in the Iran talks. Iran shows you that takes time. We don't have the time so much in North Korea, I agree with you, but let's begin where he wants something. He needs spare parts, finance, resources for what he's doing. We can do more The latest sanctions are a good step forward. We can do more from depriving him, getting the resources he needs to continue his path.
The Americans who went to see Kim Jong-un in 2014 came away saying the North Koreans are not going to give up their nuclear weapons. It's a non-starter. We tried pressuring, threatening, negotiating, trying to leverage China. Everybody's tried all that, and it's not working. So what are you left with?
Well, of course, I'm not the defender or here to explain what President Trump thinks there. I question myself, ask myself what he really wants there. But just being loud and just imitating the noisy approach, of course, of some news from North Korea is not helpful. But again, let's begin where North Korea needs something. Let's begin where they are in need of resources and technology for the weapons. Here we can indeed do more. Rumors are about countries like sometimes Egypt, Pakistan still selling something to him. Well, let's try to stop that line.
Ralf Stegner, if you accept the idea that Germany should play a bigger role in a dangerous world, if you don't deal forcefully with North Korea now, what's to stop another state playing the same games further down the line?
Well, if you would only talk to the nations that share our values, we're alone with Iceland and Norway, so that doesn't help really. I think one of the problems is not only the
not many have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, that's true, but the problem is not only North Korea, but also that we don't have enough unity among the other nations. So first of all, we should come together with the Americans and the Chinese and see that we get more unity, and then tell the North Koreans, we won't threaten you if you don't threaten us.
But the Security Council is deadlocked, as you know, on most important issues, so that unity isn't there.
That is true, but telling that this is difficult doesn't mean that we can afford to give it up.
I'm trying to see what's realistic rather than what's difficult or easy.
Well, did you think it was realistic to get out of the confrontation between the big superpowers? And it happened, because it was tried long enough. We had a Cold War that was ended, and we are not threatened by a nuclear war between the United States and Russia anymore, a Soviet Union. So things can change, but it takes a while, and there's no reasonable alternative to negotiate and to talk. And Germany can play a big role because we're economic power, and we very much benefited from what happened after World War II. So I think we can play a role in negotiating and lowering tensions in peace talks and those kind of things, rather than helping to escalate everything and making arms races and that kind of stuff.
Omid Nouripour, the Greens would want to play that role, would they?
Yeah, absolutely, but not as Germany, but as a European Union. We are too small as Germany. You know, we are definitely affected by a military escalation in East Asia. First, because we are entangled economically with the region, and second, because Berlin geographically is closer to Pyongyang than Washington, D.C. is. So we have to engage, but we can't do it as Germany. We have to do it as a European Union, and we have to stay together on that. But as Stefan Liebich just mentioned, we have a president now in South Korea who, for example, proposed the idea of one country, two systems. We never got an answer from North Korea. We have to come to a modus of talking, so we can at least get some reactions to that. What is happening to the proposals which are now there, and there are a lot of them.
I wonder if any of the audience has heard anything they'd subscribe to, or to which they would violently object. Is there anybody who wants to make a comment? All right, okay. Let's go to our second question, again from the audience. Dina Schmechel, could we have your question, please?
Hi, thank you. In the last 8 months, we've seen some quite erratic behavior from the new US president. In your opinion, are the United States under President Trump still a reliable ally?
Thank you very much. Ralf Stegner, is Trump still a reliable ally?
Yes, they are, because America is a strong democracy and they survive President Trump, I think. Although, in comparison, I mean, Bush was a liberal intellectual in comparison with Trump, so it has gotten really worse. But I guess the Americans have a strong democracy, and we also have to talk to Trump. And maybe he has to experience that some of his crazy ideas won't get support anywhere in the world. So even he could be able to learn.
Your party leader, Martin Schulz, has been pretty blunt and quite trenchant about on his views about Trump, hasn't he? I mean, he said,
yes.
Accused him of sowing chaos at home and abroad. And
Well, freedom of speech, so I would say
but
that's...
How much distance do you want to put between you and the Trump administration?
Well, it doesn't help really to be polite to somebody who is insulting the whole world and endangering the world with his tweets and all going against every minority you could think of. So I think being blunt is a good thing to do. And I
Makes
guess
you feel better, does it? Or is it in Germany's interest to be blunt?
I think it's also smart to do so, because if you don't do that, if you have the impression that he can get away with that, that doesn't benefit anybody. That doesn't benefit anybody. So being blunt doesn't mean talking with them, and maybe he's able to learn. I'm an optimistic person, so I would suggest maybe even Trump is able to learn.
And you think the CDU, meanwhile, has been pandering to Donald Trump by promising that they'll meet the 2% of GDP spending on defense that all NATO leaders promised in 2014?
That is one of the big questions in our election, that the Conservatives want to spend 30 billion euro a year more for military, and we rather want to spend that for education and families and future.
Yeah, but you signed up to this in 2014 as well.
No. They talked about that there was never a decision of the government, neither of the parliament.
You're a junior
democracy.
member of the coalition, and you signed up to it.
No.
Angela Merkel said, you're unreliable on this.
Yeah, well, you may say that, but there was no decision of the government, neither a decision of the parliament. So therefore, I think that's a question of debate in our election campaign. And yes, Mrs. Merkel, I think, doesn't stand up enough against Donald Trump. That would be useful and good, and therefore we have a difference between Social Democrats and Conservatives here.
Okay, Andreas Nick, do you want to come back on that?
I think the 2% framework was agreed a longer time before Donald Trump took the presidency. It was agreed by Social Democratic chancellors and foreign ministers. So it's interesting to see that that doesn't count anymore to the Social Democrats when it is apparently helpful in an election. I think 2% is a very academic debate. I think what we should agree on is that in a world that has increasing security challenges, where we are required to take more responsibility for our own security, where we have to take more responsibility for stability in our immediate neighborhood, in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, that we should provide our military with the means necessary so that they can do these missions with the best equipment possible. Whether that ultimately ends up at 2% is a statistical issue. I would like to broaden that perspective. We're talking about a 3% objective, including what we need to spend on development aid, on diplomacy, on other aspects of our integrated foreign policy. But in this regard, more responsibility in the security environment is an important factor.
So you want a bigger army, and that you think that helps you talk with a louder voice?
We need at least to catch up on what we have excessively done in savings in the military for the last 20 years. We also need to improve European cooperation. As the Chancellor said in the Trudering speech, we need to take more responsibility for our own destiny.
But I'm curious about why
we need to do that in conjunction also with our European partners.
I'm curious about why you want to spend more on defense, because every time there's a crisis, the German view is there's no military solution. In Ukraine and Crimea, there was no military solution, despite the fact that President Putin had taken one himself. In North Korea, there's no military solution, we're told. If there's no military solution to all these crises, what do you want a bigger army for?
One important aspect of deterrence is that an army is necessary for not to have to be used in the future.
Yeah, but if they know you're not going to use it.
We have more security challenges. We have to support our allies in Lithuania, in Poland, in other countries against the threat from Russia. We have engagements, missions of our military under EU and UN mandates in a number of countries in Africa. And I want to make sure that soldiers that we have to send into missions with our personal vote in the Bundestag, equipped in the best possible way to keep them out of harm.
Ralf Stegner, we didn't hear you. Can you?
It was Gutenberg who cut the army, and it was von der Leyen really failed on that. So it's having a good armed army, that's okay, but not rising up the cost for 30 million a year. That's a big difference.
Hypocrisy, Mr. Stegner. No. I think you want to send our soldiers into missions for which your party votes in parliament every time without providing them with adequate material and support.
That's not true.
That's irresponsible.
Omid Nouripour.
No. What I didn't get yet is what the money is for. I was a member of inquiry committees for years. asking the question how it comes that a lot of money has been burned within ineffective structures of the Bundeswehr. Burning more money doesn't mean more security, first. Second, they don't say what the money is for. You spend 2% of the GDP for generals' pensions. You can fulfill the goals and then the commitments you gave internationally. This is no more security. And the last one is we need a reform within the German army and within the European Union. We need more cooperation. You spend more money, you kill the pressure for the reform. So this is why we are opposing it.
So you want, but you want to see greater German defense engagement in NATO and the EU, is that right?
You asked the question of military solutions. There never are military solutions, but military sometimes can create windows of opportunity for other solutions. ISIS is overrunning Mosul and is going after Baghdad. We have to stop them militarily. So there are moments when you need military action. But then you need solutions in other levels. You need policy, state building, and so on and so on. We should spend the money for that. We do not have enough capacity for that.
Stefan Liebich, your party voted at your conference in June to remove US and NATO infrastructure in Germany of the kind that could be used against Russia. So you don't support this idea of a new muscular Germany in the dangerous world?
Yes, you are right. I think
you want a weaker Germany.
I think we have a bigger role. We have a great responsibility in the world, but I don't think that we should use our military forces for that. There are good things to use our bigger role. I will bring the example you just mentioned, the Minsk talks about the future of Ukraine. I think it was the best way to discuss the situation between Ukraine and Russia, and I think the German government did a wonderful job there. But
really? You have a frozen conflict and 10,000 people have died?
Yes, we have a frozen,
is that good?
We have a frozen conflict, and I'm very happy that we don't have a hot conflict. And so I think that was the right decision. On the other hand, to being number 3 in weapon exports worldwide, this is not the responsibility we have. I think this will make our world more unsafe. This will cause a lot of refugees. And so I think, yes, Germany had a bigger role. But the question is, what do we do with it?
Christine Anderson, you were nodding your head in agreement with this.
Yeah, I was nodding, but first of all, I'm really glad, Mr. Stegner, I'm really, really glad to finally hear from you that you at least acknowledge that Donald Trump is the President of the United States. To my knowledge, you failed to congratulate him. And as I do remember that our Bundespräsident right now even called him a hate preacher. Right. Very interesting, however, I find that you judged Donald Trump for insulting the whole world. Why you cannot keep back your insults. I find that very interesting.
This is not an insult, it's the truth.
So, excuse me. Mr. Stegner knows very well what I just meant.
So, Christine Anderson, come back to the question, is he a reliable partner or not? Is Trump a reliable partner or not?
Well, there's a lot of things that he said that are true. Well, first of all, we can't pump up the army all the time. We can't do that. Then it was mentioned ISIS. Yeah, we do need to defeat ISIS. But then the question has to be asked, why are they still there? Why do they still exist? When I think back on the Iraq war, the US went in and they took apart this whole country in like two weeks or something like that. And now they're really trying to tell me they cannot get rid of a bunch of morons down there. What is going wrong there?
Okay, so you are still a supporter of Trump. You remain a supporter of Trump. You said he'd spoken the truth. A lot of people say he doesn't lie until he opens his mouth.
He is the President of the United States. The American people voted for him. And I, of course, respect and acknowledge him, since they're our friends and allies, like I always hear. Or are they not?
Well, listen,
Omid, Nouripour.
The partnership with the United States is not based on the president and who was elected. The partnership is based on the people, on the values and the democracy we share.
Right, you are.
I'm a deeply convinced.
But the values of our democracy and our society are also democracy.
Absolutely.
And we have to acknowledge that a leader that has been elected.
I was banned from, I was affected by the Muslim ban in the beginning of the year, which was a bizarre thing because I'm the vice president of the US-German friendship group. But hey, they didn't let me in. I was asked all the time if I'm now fed up with being a transatlanticist. The answer is America, my America, are those people who quitted their offices and went to the airports fighting for people like me. This is America too. And so America definitely is reliable, but the president is not. There are 500,000 people going around once a month and demonstrating against the most sexist election campaign in the history of mankind. And these are our people there.
And besides, the majority voted for Clinton.
Michael
really,
Link, a very quick comment. Your party leader, Christian Lindner, says that sustaining the transatlantic relationship should be the next government's top foreign policy priority. Is that right?
Well, certainly and absolutely so. Transatlantic relations have been built for stormy weather, not for good weather. And we are in stormy weather because of an outrageous US president who is not even on one line with his own political party. I'm surprised to hear a defense of racist positions from you. Well, maybe because of your political party, of course, also has open questions to answer in terms of racism. When I hear some of what your candidates and colleagues are saying,
right now.
very clearly, therefore, your question was, is the transatlantic relations still top of the agenda? Indeed, we would try to keep the United States of America as engaged as possible in transatlantic relations. We have instruments for that. Thanks God we have the US Congress, which is well prepared to tame even a US president who is not respecting the institutions. So I trust on the majority and on the opposition in the US Congress for strong transatlantic relations.
All right. I wonder in the audience how many people still think that Donald Trump is a reliable partner for Germany. Can we see a show of hands? Who thinks he's a reliable partner? Not many. I see one hand, two hands. That's it? The rest of you are convinced he's no longer a reliable partner. Is that right? Did I get that right? All right. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on. Our next question is on Russia, and it's from Julia Schuster. Julia Schuster.
Hello. I would like to know, in your opinion, what should be done about the tension between Russia and Germany? Also, what are the chances of a more open and cooperative relationship in the near future?
Thank you very much. Omid Nouripour, do you want to start us off on that? The Greens have been strong supporters of sanctions against Russia. Endless sanctions, sanctions without a deadline.
No, definitely not.
It just goes on and on?
No. You know, first, there won't be a peace order in Europe without Russia. Second, we definitely need strong ties of dialogue with Russia. Third, I would love to see the sanctions being revoked immediately, but it depends on Russia's behavior. They came into the Crimea and they occupied a part of Ukraine. And we can't just accept such kind of breach of international law. And we can't just ignore the huge concerns of our partners in the Eastern European countries like Poland or the Baltic states.
You say you can't accept it. You have accepted it. Everybody's accepted it, haven't they?
We didn't accept. No, we did not accept it. We did
unacceptable is the most overused word.
Absolutely.
In
this is why we implemented the sanctions, and they can go after Russia has changed behavior.
Until Russia moves. So the relations are frozen.
It is action and reaction. Their action in Crimea led to the sanctions. They take the next action and get out of the country. They immediately want to get out of the sanctions. There's no question in that.
Michael Link, your party leader, seems to want to have it both ways. He said, we have to get out of the dead-end situation to break a taboo. I fear we must see Crimea as a permanent provisional arrangement. How can you have a permanent provisional arrangement? It's either permanent or it's provisional. Which is it? Or you just want to have it both ways?
Well, in one way, it's stating the obvious, that we cannot solve it fast. On the other side, of course, Christian Lindner was absolutely clear that there is no chance for any sort of recognition of the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia. He was clear on that, and he repeated it several times. And I think it's indeed important to repeat it. Of course, you cannot make it always part of all talks, as we did in the Iran talks, where we had, together with Russia, a deal to do, and not permanently speaking on Crimea, but at the same time, never forgetting about Crimea. So Crimea remains on the agenda also for us from FDP, but there are problems.
Sanctions go on.
There are problems that we can solve today, and there are problems that we can solve tomorrow. And sanctions, yes, surely should go on. Christian Lindner rightly said, there is a step-by-step approach. if Russia implements the Minsk agreement, then we can step by step reduce it. And I would rather try to hear very clear today from SPD, from Ralf Stegner, why the foreign minister now suddenly offers a lifting of the sanctions already for a ceasefire. A ceasefire is the absolute minimum condition. There should be no lifting of the sanctions if there is not a substantial move by Russia.
Ralf Stegner, you want to take that up?
I'm glad to answer that because in the tradition of the policies of Willy Brandt, I would say we at that time didn't accept that there were two German states, but we worked gradually to overcome the situation. And I guess the sanctions won't lead us anywhere. We don't accept the action against the Crimean. That was a violation of international law. We don't accept that. Yet the sanctions won't lead us anywhere. I think it would be much more reasonable to seek economic benefits in the way that the Russians see that it doesn't get them anywhere. I don't know anybody who thinks that the sanctions will lead to an improvement of the situation.
Gabriel falls behind the decisions of the European Council. I think that's not good.
Well, we have to act together as Europeans, that's true. And I don't propose, and that neither did that Sigmar Gabriel, propose a German action by our nation alone. We have to act as Europeans. But as your own party chairman said, things don't get us anywhere in the moment, so we have to overcome the situation. And the Minsk agreement is there, but we don't see any improvement, actually neither on both sides, not only on the Russian side. And both things have to be avoided. We should not see the Russians as the evil power of all, and we should not do the opposite, as some parties do, applauding to everything Mr. Putin does. But
well, you're doing both in a way. You have a former Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, who's just accepted to go on the board of Rosneft and
well, that may be.
And accept Russian money for his second major job in Russian industry and Russian energy business.
It's the same Gerd Schröder who was against invading Iraq, proposed by the American president and followed by Chancellor Merkel, or by that at that time leader of the opposition Merkel. And I think, although I'm not in favor of his new job personally, he belongs to the person who worked for better relations between Russia and Germany. And
you're not against his new job. You're not in favor of it.
I'm not in favor of it.
You're embarrassed by it?
I wouldn't decide it if I was the person to say I wouldn't do that, but it's his own decision, and he is not a politician anymore.
Andreas Nick, you raised your eyebrows there.
Well, let me say, I think Germany's interest would be much better saved if Social Democrats all in about were more carefully to avoid the impression that they're overly interested in securing personal slots on Mr. Putin's payroll now or in the future. But
we don't want to talk about politicians from the Conservatives, what they are doing now and how they earn their money. I mean, we shouldn't do that here.
Well, I know you don't like the subject, that's clear. But I think we have clearly a strategic interest as Germany in good and constructive and peaceful relationships with Russia. But there's a clear reference point for that, and that is the Charter of Paris that everyone in Europe signed up to in 1990 as a fundamental principle for how we work and live together as states in Europe, renouncing violence as a political instrument, respecting the territorial integrity of states, smaller and bigger. And I think as soon as Russia is making clear that they're willing to return credibly to the principles of the Charter of Paris, sanctions are no longer required. But let me remind you that Rosneft is a blacklisted company under EU sanctions, and I think it is a disgrace for a former Chancellor to accept a position on that board.
And Andreas Nick, there are some ambiguities in the CDU's policy towards Russia, though, aren't there? You're pro-sanctions, but not at the expense of your own Nord Stream 2 deal, which brings Russian gas to Germany. Somehow that is exempt from sanctions? Why would that be?
I'm personally pretty skeptical about the Nord Stream deal. I think it is not in the best strategic interest of our country, but I have to accept that this is a private investment decision
How is it? It's a political decision.
There are no energy projects such as such being just private projects. Nowhere on the whole, and you don't find no one of them on the whole earth.
Can you explain to me what instrument would be available to prevent this if this is something that is privately financed and decided?
There is a law in Germany called Außenwirtschaftsgesetz. You can just read it, and there are a lot of ways to avoid such a project, which is at the end of the day, of course, pushed. You know, having a chance to talking about keeping the EU together as the highest priority of German policies, which I totally accept and totally endorse as a sentence, means that we take for serious the concerns of the countries in the Baltics, for example. And the Nord Stream 2 is exactly the opposite of it.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of hypocrisy here, I would say. If we went against every violation of European law, we should change things with Hungary, for instance. You're a Conservative Party family. With some of the things Polish do. We would be much more credible against the Turkish Premier if we did the same thing within the EU. And we are...
for which policy do you apply?
What I want to say...
We'll come on to Turkey
What I want to say is violating international law, which everybody can see, doesn't lead to sanctions in every case. So we have very different standards talking about which nation we're talking to. And that's the point.
Equality of injustice.
That's the point. Yeah.
All right, Christine Anderson.
My argument.
Christine Anderson, your party talks of ending the sanctions policy, deepening economic cooperation with Russia. In other words, giving them exactly what they want. Is that right? The textbook definition of appeasement.
We are not giving them what they want. That is, however, what we say, and it's the only right thing to do. First of all, we keep talking about illegal annexions, as if the Crimea was taken by the Russians. It is true, though. Yeah, well, you may laugh at me, but just listen for a moment.
Was it funny?
There are the Charta, how states deal with one another, but there's also another Charta, UN Charta, where it says that every people have the right to decide for themselves where they want to belong to. And that's what the people in Crimea did. And in this case, thank you. In this case, I would at least take into consideration, maybe it wasn't so illegal after all. Well, what happened there?
What about the Crimean Tatars?
Point of the matter is, I'm talking. Point of the matter is, the AfD does want to end those sanctions because they're ridiculous and they're not doing any good. The Russian people are suffering from it, and the Germans suffer from it too. We are losing jobs, all of that. No, end to these sanctions.
Christine Anderson, your party held a Russian Congress in Magdeburg not so long ago. And you sold copies of Putin's speeches there. So you're basically doing his PR for him these days, is that right?
I don't know whether or not they were selling speeches of Putin. I have no knowledge of that, but I take your word for it that they did. So what?
So what?
The speeches are not allowed to be read, or what are you trying to get at?
We didn't sell anybody else's speeches. Those were the only ones.
Just wait, maybe we will. Who knows?
Maybe he'll do his PR for him. Let's talk while we have some time on Syria, because Mr. Putin is busy protecting the Syrian president.
One word on Nord Stream, if you allow.
Very quickly, please.
Very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah.
This is really worth mentioning because Nord Stream shows in an exemplary way that here both parts of the actual coalition in Berlin made enormous mistakes. This is a project which was made behind the back of the Baltic states, of Sweden, Finland, Poland, Slovakia, all rightly criticizing it. We would better sooner than later stop that project. Absolutely. It is not helpful. It is a very bad project.
All right. I just want to look, before we leave this topic of Russia, I want to look briefly at its relationship with Syria. Mr. Putin is busy protecting the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, who the UN says is responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people. What's your key message to Mr. Putin on Syria? Would you like to start, Mr. Stegner?
That this is a wrong way to go about this question. I think Assad should not be protected, yet on the other hand, without Russia and other countries, we won't get a peaceful solution for Syria, which is really overdue for a long time because the Syrian people have to suffer. Many people come as refugees, still many live there under really bad conditions. So not accepting the Russian position on that, but neither accepting the position of others because there's a war going on there. supported by different nations.
Omid, Nouripour.
I would ask him if he shouldn't learn from the huge mistakes the Americans did in Iraq, which was just to forget that after a conflict you need something like a process of national reconciliation, which is definitely not possible with a person who is the symbol for chemical weapons, barrel bombs and ruins for the majority of the people of Syria.
Andreas
So it's not about regime change, it's about the question of how reconciliation can be done.
Andreas Nick, very quickly, message to Putin on Syria.
Russia is welcome as a responsible player in the international system. Protecting dictators who have staged warfare against their own people is not part of that.
Stefan Liebich.
The problem in Syria is that 4 out of 5 members, permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are active there, with military and without a solution of the United Nations Security Council.
Message to Putin. Message to Putin on this.
This is wrong from all sides.
All right, but the message to Putin.
From Putin and from the other sides too.
Christine Anderson.
Well, I would say it was high time that Russia got involved in Syria, because since they have, ISIS has been put back and they have been put in their place. So I would say, thank you.
And 500,000 people are dead. Michael Lindner.
Clear message to President Putin that if Russia wants to be a respected player on the international scene, here is an area where it could really contribute to it, but not in taking sides for Assad, but in really bringing also this regime, which is, and let's not forget it, at the cause also of the refugee crisis in that region. Not the Islamic State has air force who bombed Aleppo, but it was Assad's troops. Therefore, Russia has a role to play there. We want to see a constructive Russian role. We are waiting for that in vain until now.
Okay, all right. We're going to move on now to the next question, which is on the issue of refugees, and it comes from Katie Redmond. Katie Redmond.
Hi, thank you. It's clear that the current strategies to limit loss of life, respect migrant rights, and ensure security in Europe are not working. What are your creative solutions to the migrant crisis? Thank you.
It's become clear that the current strategies are not working to limit loss of life, respect migrants' rights, and ensure security in Europe. What are your creative proposals for solving the migrant crisis? Christine Anderson, the policy is not working. What are you going to do?
Why did I know I was going to be the first to answer? Well, what are the creative the answers? Well, people always talk about we need to stop the causes for that, and like I just said, Putin sort of got into there and he tried to stop one of the causes. What else do we have to do? We just need to get all on the table and we need to discuss things, and we cannot. And what is happening in Syria, by the way, it's basically cost. These people, they don't want to leave their country, to be frank, but they're made to leave. And when you look at the UN camps for the refugees,
who's made to leave? You think 2,500 people this year wanted to drown in the Mediterranean?
I'm getting to that. When you look at the UN refugee camps that were set up in the neighbor states, if Mrs. Merkel was so humanitarian, like she always says, where was she when the world community decided to cut down on the funds that these countries received for feeding, clothing these people? They got $31.
I don't want to go into the history. I don't want to go into the history. I just want to know what you're proposing to do.
$31 per refugee, $31, and it will cut down out of nowhere to $12. Where was Mrs. Merkel when that happened? I didn't hear a word from her.
Christine Anderson, what does the AfD want to do with the migrant issue? Your manifesto says German borders must be closed. This is your answer. Slam the door shut.
This is not our...
That's the solution.
No, this is not our answer to the migrant crisis. This is our answer to our catastrophic internal security. We can't have this here. I'm a woman.
So it's somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's problem.
It's not somebody else's problem. It's my problem. I cannot just go out on the street anymore at any old... No, I cannot. No, I cannot. How do you know? How do you know? Are you walking in my feet?
Your whole speech is like that.
Are you walking in my feet? No, you're not. You don't know what I'm facing.
Please, please. If you all speak at once, nobody can hear anything.
And it's presumptuous to think so.
Andreas Nick, everyone seems to be agreed in the CDU that there must be no repeat of 2015. Is that right?
We were faced by a humanitarian crisis that we had to resolve.
I understand, but there's no repeat.
We've made significant progress. That's why I don't accept the initial proposition that the refugee crisis as such is not solved. I think we have provided quite a significant solution to stop the dying in the Mediterranean between Turkey and Greece.
2,500 people so far this year. 2,500 people
that was not the region. I mean, if let me finish, we have a very different situation in the central Mediterranean of people from Africa coming to Sicily and southern Italy. This is a very different situation. But I think a number of the key components of the EU-Turkey agreement could be transferred to the situation over time. I think every solution, has to have three components. Better securing external borders, improving the livelihood of people in their countries of origin and the countries of transit, and to a certain extent also open legal transfers for resettlement and immigration. That is one thing that we need to do in partnership also with countries in Central and Western Africa, where most of those going to Sicily at the moment come from.
And what about the situation in Libya? Médecins Sans Frontières says the detention of migrants is rotten to the core. It's a thriving enterprise of kidnapping, torture and extortion. Migrants are locked up, women and girls are being raped by the guards, men are being beaten up. Do you think this is a solution?
I'm absolutely convinced that the solution for this problem is not in Libya. Libya is not a viable state to provide safety for these people. We need to find these solutions with the countries.
The West is acquiescing at this.
With the countries of origin.
Médecins Sans Frontières says European states and Libyan authorities are jointly implementing a blockade on the ability of people to seek safety. Omid Nouripour, do you go along with this?
It's even worse than that. We are paying militias now to stop trafficking people across the Mediterranean Sea. Now they do it and they traffic narcotics. Is this the right idea to protect us? I don't think so. What we are seeing in these days is that there are a lot of short-term measures which are taken now, which are destroying the long-term solutions we need. Giving arms to the army of Chad means that they're gonna keep away the refugees now, but they're going to produce more refugees. It's going to happen, definitely. And you can see it. There are a lot of dirty deals with dictators in these days. You can see it in Egypt, and especially in Turkey, which is a very, very bad idea. And we should stop being blackmailed by the hysteria and the fear of those people who just are driving the agenda of a couple of parties here.
Stefan Liebich. There's a lot of talk about addressing the migrant problem at source. In those source countries, people are beset by corruption, war, unstable government, massive human rights abuse, catastrophic economic hardship. How on earth are you going to address those problems at source?
It is a very, very long-term process. But if we don't start it, then the year 2015 was just the beginning. We have a situation that some people speak about protecting our borders. There was a time when protecting meant protecting against enemies. And now we are protecting us against people who are asking for our help. This is a terrible situation. The only way to answer this is have legal ways for migrants, to give them the opportunity to come with a ship or with an airplane and not with these silly boats. This is the answer, and I know this will change something in our country, but I don't think that this is a problem.
So no limits?
We have no limits. We would help people who are asking for help. This is our policy, and this is what we are fighting for.
All right.
What would you do if 50 million decided to come? What would you do?
The thing is, we have now 67 million on the world who are fleeing. 67 million, this is the highest number. What do you think, how many of them are coming to the Western states? Only 5%.
Well, if you go down there and get it by boat, they will all come.
Most of them are asking for help in poor countries, and they are getting help there. This is the truth.
Right.
Ralf Stegner, very briefly.
We could help more of them. We could help more of them down there.
I'm going to Ralf Stegner, very briefly.
Let me say two things. One is we need common European action on that thing, and every European country doesn't only have to have the advantages of the European Union, but also the burdens that go with that. Second, we have to go about the long-term things we talked about. And third, everything what was said by the lady in yellow here is outside of our consensus of democratic parties.
My name is Christine Anderson.
We are going to move on to the next question, which is on Turkey, follows well from that, and it's from Sasha Zawatai. Sasha Zawatai, could we have your question, please?
Thank you. Good evening. How do you insist on human rights in Turkey, but avoid alienating a huge and important country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. How do you insist on human rights in Turkey but avoid alienating a huge and important country? Does any of you actually have a clear policy on that? Omid Nouripour, you got your hand up first.
First, we should finally take a clear language. We didn't for the last 2 years. We had a chancellor going to Turkey and meeting up with Erdogan 1 week before the elections, but refusing a meeting with the opposition. This is what I would call campaigning for Erdogan. And this was the worst thing you can do. Second, we of course have to rethink the customs union and the question of economic aid, which is not coming to the people and they're not benefiting of it, but Erdogan does. And the last one is watching what's going on in the southeast of the country, which is a civil war. We have to stop selling arms to Erdogan. This should be over now immediately, because he is using it against his own people and against the Kurdish militias in north of Syria, who are fighting ISIS. By the way, they are doing it, not but the Russians, but this is another issue.
Andreas Nick, I know the government has cut back by more than half on the number of weapons that are being sold to Turkey, and they're now being considered on a case-by-case basis. But this is a country that is being accused of massive human rights violation. How can you continue to sell arms to them at all?
Well, as we've seen this week, Turkey is now starting to buy weapons massively in Russia. So that is an.
So you're saying if you don't do it, others will. Is that a moral position?
I think we have the question. I think raised exactly. I think the dilemma that we face with dealing with Turkey. It's a country in a very important geostrategic location. It's a society which we are interconnected with over 3 million people of Turkish origin in our country. So every conflict, every polarization of the internal situation in Turkey has an immediate impact also on our situation in Germany. And that's why we have to keep running a very delicate balance between very explicit, very outspoken on human rights, on rule of law, on freedom of expression, but at the same time keeping an open dialogue and open harm, especially to those parts of Turkish society, and this is at least 50%, who look towards Europe and towards the West for a democratic and stable framework. This may not be a short-term solution, but that is something that is in our best interest, medium and long term.
And Andreas Nick, the UN talks of massive human rights violations, hundreds of alleged unlawful killings. You still provide the instruments to kill. Is there no limit to the human rights violations that Berlin will put up with? Is there no limit to that?
I think we have to look very carefully and case by case to what is under consideration under weapons export. But it would be, I think, undirected, I think, to really look at the issue of weapons as a key question of how we deal with Turkey. We have different other things to deal with that, whether it's German prisoners in Turkish prisons, whether it's a question whether we need to issue a travel warning at some point.
It's also a question of how Germany wants to be seen abroad as tolerating human rights abuses. Well, even if they're from an ally, on a massive scale.
The problem is you start to criticize Turkey when the first German citizens are in prison, and when after 55 persons, journalists are in prison. They started to undermine the law and the rule of law in Turkey, and nobody said anything on that in the German government. After the first German was arrested, everyone was screaming. This is a problem. There never has been red lines for that. What's going on there?
This is simply not true. I was in Ankara the night before the chairwoman of HDP was put in prison, and I was supposed to meet her at 9 a.m. and I learned at 3 a.m. in the night that she was put in prison just before we were going to meet her. Don't tell me we were keeping quiet on that. This is simply untrue.
Not about you personally, but the government just always having quiet.
Michael Link.
The question was about not alienating Turkey at the same time when we criticize it. Yes, indeed, that's a very important point. Our criticism is not to Turkey. not to the Turkish people, not to Islam, not to Turkish history. Our criticism is to Erdogan. He's the one who is responsible that these negotiations with the EU need to be stopped, ended, because with an increasingly authoritarian, nearly dictatorial rule by himself, of course, this country has no chance, stands no chance at all of joining the EU. Therefore, it's very important to speak frank and to support the opposition, those at least who are still not jailed. In my professional life, I had to observe the last 4 elections there as the chief observer of the OSCE, and I can tell you very clearly the deterioration of the situation is dramatic, and therefore we need to clearly address our criticism, and that is not to the Turkish people, but to Erdogan and his ruling party.
Michael Liebich.
And it's high time, by the way, and indeed it's high time. I agree with Omid. It's high time that the government, the federal government, finally takes measures, for example, in stopping the pre-accession financing of Turkey by the EU. That is overdue.
Stefan Liebich.
The first and most important step is that we have to end the border deal between Germany and Turkey. And I think
what's the plan B? And what's the plan B? Once you've ended that deal?
What do you mean?
What's the plan? What's the plan after that?
The plan is that people who are asking for help will get help in the EU, and that not Mr. Erdogan is stopping them. This is the plan. As long as he has this deal, he can blackmail our government, and he does it every day. Our government is afraid to do something against him because they are afraid of the refugees which are coming if you end this deal. And I think this is a wrong decision. The second one is we have until now a factory planned there by Rheinmetall. This is terrible now that a German company is building tanks there. This is terrible. We have to stop this right now. But I have one difference to you, Mr. Link. I don't think that we ultimately should stop the negotiations. I think we should suspend it because the Turkey of Mr. Erdogan cannot be part of the EU. But if I am thinking about the other half of the Turkish people who are not in favor of Mr. Erdogan, I think we should have the doors open for a maybe better future.
I think we have a credible position on that because for a long time, the Social Democrats were in favor of keeping the Turkey within Europe, other than the Conservatives did. And Erdogan started out very progressive. But now it's the point where you can see that not the Turkish people, but the Erdogan government arrests people for just doing their work, fights against minorities. So stopping arms deals, suspending the talks about the European entrance in the European Union, and also stopping the money going there, and with clear German words. Therefore, I think Scholz is right. And he has talked to Erdogan very often, telling him that it's not a thing to get away with it. I have not the same opinion as far as the refugee question is concerned. Because what does it mean, cutting off the refugee deal? That's not the point. I mean, what Turkey is really afraid of is the stopping of economic ties. They have many refugees in their countries, and they do something for them, and we pay for that too. We support that, and I think that's a good thing to do because most of the refugees have a better life in Turkey than they have in their countries where they come from. But we should not be blackmailed, accepting human rights violations by the Turkish government, arresting people, and suspending democracy more and more. So clear words, no arms, no money, and also economic pressure. That, I think, has to be done by the German government.
Omid Nouripour, very briefly, please.
2 points. The first one is you asked for a plan B.
Yeah.
We have to understand that the necessity of the refugee deal with Turkey started when Germany pushed Greece so hard that they sacked more than half of the people who are working with the border protection. This is why this has been necessary. The second one is the question of the membership. I would agree that we shouldn't stop it. We should freeze it in this moment. Okay. The reason for that is, as Michael Link just mentioned, half of the people in Turkey refuse the way Erdogan is going. The only perspective these people have is the European Union. We shouldn't shut down this perspective. Erdogan is trying to do it.
Christine Anderson, how do you balance the importance of Turkey with its human rights violations?
I was really surprised that there were at least 3 people agreeing to what we've been having in our manifesto for a long time. Of course, we have to stop the deal with Turkey. And the point of the matter is, Merkel was making this deal with Erdogan while the human rights violations had been going on for quite some time. She knew it. So what did you go down there making that deal for? We are having someone who is known to violate human rights. He is selecting who is going to Europe and who is not. We cannot accept that. I'm very sorry.
And you stopped the EU negotiations? You stopped the EU?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So slam the door, effectively, on Turkey.
We've been saying that all along.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question, which is on Brexit and the EU. And it's a question from Ismail Dibirov, please. Ismail Dibirov.
Good evening. Some senior officials, as we all know, sounded the idea of punishing the UK over Brexit. What is, in your opinion, more important, being tough on Britain or maintaining good relations? Thanks.
All right. What's more important, being tough on Britain or maintaining good relations? Stefan Liebich, your party seems to lay considerable blame on the EU for Brexit. Your manifesto says it's the anti-social and undemocratic EU and the policies of its member states which are boosting authoritarian forces. What kind of attitude do you think Germany should adopt towards the United Kingdom in the light of Brexit?
I think the European Union is a very important thing. We should go on with it, but we have to change it. This is what we in our platform meant. And regarding Brexit, I want to say, I think the people in the UK will regret the decision. What we have to do as the people in the European Union is to show, and this is not a punishment, is to show that such a decision has consequences. If you make a decision that freedom of workforce in the European Union is no longer allowed, then you cannot be part of the common market. This is not a punishment, this is a logical consequence, and if you don't do that, then we will have some populist forces in some other countries, in France, in Netherlands. If they see this is no problem to go out of the European Union, then we would support them. So because of that, I would be very clear as the European Union, you made a decision and this will have consequences for you.
You made a decision and it's a bad decision.
Yes.
And what if it doesn't fail? You're almost saying you need it to fail to encourage everybody else to stay in the European Union. You want it to fail, don't you, for Britain?
Yeah. What do you mean with fail?
You want Brexit to fail. You want Britain to be worse off in the future than it is now.
I just described the legal situation. If the people in the UK are deciding that they don't want to have a freedom of workforce in the European Union, then it is their decision. It is a democratic decision. But this has a clear consequence. You cannot be part of the common market. This is just what I say. And this is a very harsh consequence. And I think the people in the UK will regret this decision.
Ralf Stegner, your SPD economy minister, Brigitte Zypries, is clear she expects Britain to suffer more from Brexit than the German economy. But the same question to you. It's almost as if you want Britain to suffer more.
No, it's a tragedy for Europe that this great country leaves the European Union, but it's a catastrophe for England. And there's a lesson from that for
Isn't that up to England to decide?
Well, yes, but there's a lesson from that. Young people go vote, otherwise you get Brexits, Trumps, and all those things. So that's part of. I don't think that the majority of the British people really wanted what's happening now. The point is, I think we should not give up the friendship with Great Britain. We shouldn't do anything to further that. On the other hand, if you want to have the privileges of the European Union but not the burdens, we will see many Great Britons. I could see the list of nations that would follow on that, so therefore that doesn't work.
Is this
but
the fear?
There is a solution to that.
Are you afraid of that?
A little bit. There's a solution to that. I mean, there could be another election in Great Britain if they see they don't get anywhere with the negotiations, that they change their course. And I'm
optimistic. So you're leaving open the possibility that they might want to come back in?
Yes.
And there would be an open door for that, would there?
We should. We should have the door open because Europe should always be a common union where everybody can join who joins our values.
Michael Link.
Full respect for the democratic decision of the UK people, but of course it is, and I'm not qualifying it because we should respect it. At the other side, of course, it's a pity. It's a real pity for the EU because it's weakening all of us. In many areas, in many ways, for example, for me as a free Democrat, UK in trade issues, in many other issues of economic policy was quite a good ally very, very often in the discussions in the Council of Ministers, in the European Parliament, etc. But again, we have to respect it. We should leave the door open, and we have to say a very unpleasant truth to our UK friends. If you leave it, then of course you have to also to bear the consequences. Let's take manufacturing. Mini, for example. I'm not sure whether Mini will be in future also always produced in the UK. So I think, yes, there will be consequences, they will be damaging, but not only for the UK, for all of us.
What do you think the EU has learned from Brexit? What lessons would you have liked the EU to learn from Brexit?
Ask me when the Brexit deal is done. We still don't know the terms.
Emmanuel Macron says it's a symptom of failure that we in Europe must have the courage to face head on. Do you accept that?
Well, that is certainly politically true. And of course, one lesson learned is, because of Brexit, but also because of the refugee crisis, that of course we need to maintain the EU together while not centralizing it too much. We need to find the right way and to be strong where we need to be strong, defense, trade, currency, etc., and to be decentralized where we need a more loose approach, like in taxation or social security.
Andreas Nick, just a few hours before we came on air, there was a speech by Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, who wants to push ahead to a vision, he said, of some 30 countries using the euro, a single EU finance minister, and he's dead set against the kind of two-speed Europe that both Germany and France have proposed. How do you react to that? Is that learning the lessons of Brexit?
Well, let me stress, first of all, Brexit is a terribly bad idea. It's bad for the EU, it's bad for the United Kingdom, it's not in Germany's best interest. We have a vested interest in maintaining strong and friendly relationships with the United Kingdom. And therefore I think the terminology of punishment is not the right way of thinking about it. But we have to protect the integrity of the EU, and the British government may have to learn the hard way that you can't have your cake and eat it, which is their current negotiating strategy, apparently. And they increasingly run the risk of crushing out of the EU with a big crisis. As you mentioned, Mr. Juncker's speech, I think at least we are having now an open debate on how we want to take Europe further. If Brexit has one positive...
Would you support his vision?
If Brexit has one positive, that it has made many of us more aware of where the actual benefits are of the European Union, which are taken for granted way too often. We may have different ideas. I think we should have a clearer focus in the European Union of solving the big issues, and that we have overwhelming public support for that Europe should deal with securing external borders, with providing security and defense, and also with stabilizing our economies and making them more competitive. And I think in this regard, something like a European monetary fund is probably a good idea. Whether you should force the euro on everyone, you may have question marks, but that is a debate that is just starting. But I think we have a great opportunity.
So you have reservations over the Juncker vision?
On some of the Juncker visions, I have my reservations, but I think we have an excellent window of opportunity with President Macron after the German election, maybe for the next 2 years, to make a big step ahead in Europe and make Europe more coherent, more successful, and more positive in citizens' views.
Christine Anderson, you're the big cheerleaders for Brexit, aren't you? Your manifesto says it's an example for Germany to follow.
And
is that
to
right?
support that, I would like to cite Angela Merkel. She said, the internal cohesion of the European Union would come before defending German exports to the UK. She said that on October 6th in 2016. And that statement goes to show how little Chancellor Merkel respects her own people. It is seriously.
Andreas Nick, do you want to just come back on that briefly?
So I'm really glad that this young man asked that question. Yes, it is absolutely right. UK is about to be punished just to teach them a lesson and just to let every other country in Europe know, don't even try it. That's the message I'm getting here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andreas Nick, you want to come back on that?
Again, protecting the integrity of the European Union is something different than punishing someone. We have to pursue our own strategic interests. Germany is the main beneficiary of European integration. We need to keep that going, and we need to make that a success, because with our geography, with our history, with our economy, that's what we depend on, and that's the policy that our government is following.
All right. We're going to come to the final question, which is from Nicholas Schmidt. Nicholas Schmidt. If we can get a microphone to you. How quickly time has gone.
So if you had to choose out of the United Kingdom, the United States, Russia or Turkey, which one would you consider Germany's closest partner under the current circumstances, and why?
If you had to choose out of the UK, the US, Russia or Turkey, which would you consider Germany's closest partner to be under the current circumstances, and why? Let's start at this end. Ralf Stegner.
I think our closest partner stay the United States of America, besides of the American government. Current circumstances don't mean that you have to agree with President Trump. We very much miss President Obama, and we will get a better president soon, I would think. Therefore, they are still our closest friend and ally, and that should stay that way.
Omid Nouripour.
It's the United Kingdom as a member of, still a member of the European Union, and then still a member of this continent and a democracy. So it's absolutely clear to me that it's UK first in our relations between the four countries.
Whether it's in or out of the EU?
No, listen, I'm very unhappy with Theresa May saying that the first step to get a global Britain is installing a low-tax oasis in the middle of the single market, and we can't let that happen. But at the end of the day, this is Europe, and UK is, of course, part of it. And of course, we have strong ties, and we have to keep them.
Andreas Nick.
I think as your lists excluded France, among the four choices you've given, it's definitely the United States.
It was his intention.
It's definitely the United States, with all the reservations that we have about the president and the current administration. But over the long term, this is the most important relationship that we have, and we will make every effort to convince the American people and the American government to continue to play a constructive role for the multilateral international order, because it's in Germany's preeminent strategic interest to sustain and develop that order.
Stefan Liebich.
I wouldn't choose, because states are
That's
not...
why you're in opposition.
States are not friends. States are not friends. States are not partners. Sometimes we have common interests. Sometimes we have not. We have to decide it case by case, and so I wouldn't choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but who would you choose then?
I wouldn't.
That's the question. You wouldn't choose any of them. Any of the countries.
It depends on the question, not generally.
The question, if you had to choose out of the UK, the US, Russia or Turkey, indulge us, please, Mr. Liebich.
You can ask me again and again. I will not make charts between countries. We have forgotten Israel. We have forgotten Poland.
Cuba.
Those, not Cuba. This may be your friend, but I'm not. I'm not. So I think it is not wise to make a chart list of states. We have to talk about the special topic, and then we should give an answer and not say, this is my closest friends and you are not.
Christine Anderson.
Well, as a European, of course, I am choosing the UK. And I am applauding the British people that they have voted in that referendum. And I'm really stunned at how the Democrats, all the Democrats that are standing here, have so little respect for the decision the British people made in that referendum. It's a shame. It's really a shame.
So you would put Germany's interests in the hands of UK? You would think that's your closest...
No, I didn't say that.
Closest natural ally to that extent.
That wasn't the question. It was the question, who out of those four countries would you choose as your closest ally? And I answered that question.
All right, Michael Link.
Mixing up the question isn't helping.
The US is key for so many things. If we want to bring things forward in the 21st century, in terms of a liberal, multilateral international order, we need the US as a strong partner. As I said, transatlantic relations is not for good weather, it's for stormy weather. Let's reach out to all of those in the US, of course, who believe in that. That's not in the White House, but in the Congress. We have lots of them, and in civil society.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. And that, I'm afraid, is all we have time for. My thanks to our distinguished panel, to our studio audience, and to those of you watching around the world. The argument and analysis continue on Facebook. Please share that widely. For now, though, from all of us on the Conflict Zone team here in Berlin, goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you very much.